Thank you so much, Mel. I do like a saucy MC. Well, of course, now everyone's wondering what was the inappropriate comment, and honestly, it wasn't that bad. We were looking at the agenda, and I said, hey, look, I'm on top of you. She started giggling. I asked, what do you mean? And it just went downhill from there. I had to laugh about something that Mel said, and it tickled something deep inside for me here. I was listening to the part where she spoke about the cameras and how you sort of subtly try and pose. And as speakers, we do that whether we want to or not. You'll stand here using very nominal body language and chatting with the audience until you see the camera arrive out of your peripheral vision. And then you become Moses parting the Red Sea. And then the camera changes angles and you hand down the 10 Commandments. The camera changes angle again and you find a light beam so that you can be Lawrence of Arabia staring across the desert. You have to wonder, why do we do that? I mean, are we hoping that afterwards when people see the photos, they'll go, wow, he was obviously discussing the meaning of life. And then the camera moves away and we go back to chatting about cool business ideas. So, folks, thanks very much for the chance to chat with you this morning. And my topic today is about thinking differently. It's about the idea of the world of business innovation. Whenever we hear that term, innovation, which has really become the ultimate corporate buzzword, there are usually two things that spring immediately to mind for us, two problems. And the first is the cost of the thing. We assume that innovating costs a heck of a lot of money. And the second one is infrastructure. We assume that to innovate, you have to be an Apple or a Google or a Mercedes or a BMW. You have to have technology in the background. You have to develop apps. It has to be complex. In fact, it turns out it's absolutely untrue. If you are thinking in the right way, you needn't spend money and you don't have to have huge amounts of infrastructure. A couple of years ago, I was driving along in Joburg listening to an ad on the radio. This is before last week when the roads were washed away in Johannesburg. It's been terrifying. But an ad came on for Virgin Atlantic Airlines. And the voiceover said, don't you hate the fact that you have to pay for your plane tickets in full before you can apply for a visa to go overseas? And that one caught my attention. And the voiceover went on to say, at Virgin Atlantic Airlines, we are the only airline that will fully refund your ticket if you don't get your visa. I thought that's absolutely brilliant because they've got the technology, they've got the money and the infrastructure, but what they've done is incredibly clever. They just asked a simple question. And the question is, what's awful about dealing with us? And that was the heart and soul, the key to innovating for them. They didn't change anything in their cabins, they didn't change anything with their technology. They just asked the question, what makes life worse for people who interact with us? And how can we make that better? And from what I've seen, they seem to be uniquely good at doing this. There's a very famous story about an air hostess who was walking down the aisle just before the flight was about to take off. And over 100 passengers have taken their seats, but they don't get to take off because the flight was delayed. And it happened in Nevada. You're sitting there looking out the windows, and it's this 42-degree heat where you can't see the horizon. It's just this liquid blur. And she's doing things the way they've always been done, which is to hand out a hot towel to each of the passengers. And she has a very obvious thought, which was, this is ridiculous. We should hand out cold towels to all of our passengers. And that innovation got passed up the chain of command, and it made it into Forbes Business magazine as one of the most brilliant business innovations of the year. And it was so simple, and it cost nothing. It was only about asking a different question. Now, folks, today I'm going to go into a lot of different detail about how you can innovate in your business. But right up front, that's the cheat sheet. That's the master key. All innovation is just about asking a different question. And it's astonishing what can go wrong when we refuse to do so. True story. At the end of World War II, there's an Italian guy who's been building tanks and working in the vehicle repair department for the Italian army. The war comes to an end and he goes home, and now he decides to use his skills to start his own company. And he decides to start building tractors. And he builds tractors that sell all across southern Italy and eventually all across Europe. And as a result of this, he becomes quite prosperous. Now, what do you do if you're Italian and you've suddenly come into money? You go and buy your first Ferrari. Any Ferrari drivers in the audience today? You know, I've never had one person say yes. So for you or I, buying a Ferrari would be a big deal. I mean, the entry-level ones are like 3 million rand these days. But for an Italian, it's on a whole different level. If you happen to be Italian, Ferrari is part of your history, your heritage. It's in the marrow of your bones. It's in your blood. And buying one is like buying a rolling combination of mama and opera and pasta. So he gets his Ferrari and he gets it out onto the road and pulls away from the line, first gear, second gear. There's something a little awkward about third gear, but he gets past it. Up into fourth and fifth, comes back down again, fourth, third. Something wrong with third gear. And it starts to bug him. So being a technically minded man, he takes his Ferrari home and he disassembles it down to its nuts and bolts, as you do. And he builds it back up again and comes up with a better solution to the clutch. Fixes this thing, gets it out on the road, first gear, second gear, third gear, it's a dream. Back down again, third, second, first, it's perfect. So being a patriotic Italian, he goes to Ferrari and tries to give them this technology for free. He tries to tell them what's awful about them. And Ferrari shuts him down. They will not even meet with him. The lady at the front desk comes back and says, "I'm sorry, sir, they're just not even interested in seeing you." So the man walks away from this meeting down the steps, and he's got his car keys in his pocket, and he's walking toward his Ferrari. And as he does, the anger starts to grow. Have you ever gotten to that point where the adrenaline starts to make your fingers shake like this? And you get that coppery taste in your mouth. Before he had reached his car, he made a vow to himself that that afternoon he would start his own sports car company. And that very day, that is exactly what Dr. Lamborghini did. That's the ultimate ouch, or in South Africa, EINA. And all that happened there was an organization was unwilling to hear what was wrong with itself. And its leading customer was trying to give it an opportunity to innovate, and they didn't want to hear. Now, it's hard to hear those sorts of things. The human ego doesn't want to know what's wrong with us. It wants to know what's right with us and what's right with our industry. But there is gold to be found in what's wrong if you're willing to go dredging there. Now, of course, you've got to do it the right way as well. You can't look at it through the eyes of a manager, and that's quite an interesting problem for a group like yourself. Let's say, for example, that you are the manager of a high-end hotel chain, and you want to make sure that your rooms are impeccable, that they're doing everything that they need to do. So what do? You get your clipboard, you walk into your room, and you start ticking boxes. And you tick the box that says, yes, the carpet has been vacuumed and the bed has been made. You see that the curtains are closed, so you tick that box. The TV is on standby, tick the box. Everything is as it should be. Hair dryer is in the cupboard where it should be, tick the box, and you're done. And you think that room is perfect. Now, if you go and spend a night in that room, you will have a dramatically different experience. So you get into bed, and that's when you realize for the first time that the curtains leave a 2-inch gap and the city light is streaming in from outside. Now, if you're a very fancy hotel manager, you're wearing your silk pajamas when you get up. If you're anything like me, you're in your underpants when you run across the side, across the room to try and prop it shut with a chair. I'm sure you've done this before. So now you get back into bed and you close your eyes and concentrate really hard on sleeping, but that's when you realize that the little blinking standby light on the TV is like a parade going by on the far side of your eyelids. You can't sleep through it. So you fish a sock off the floor, and you stand on your bed and try and get the sock over the little standby light. You've done it too, and I did it last night. Then you're wide awake, so you pick up your phone, go onto social media, maybe say goodnight to your wife, goodnight to your girlfriend. Don't get them confused. And you try and plug your phone in, but that's when you realize that there is no plug next to the bed. So you have to get up and move across the room and plug it in on the far side, which means that when your alarm goes off in the morning, you're going to have to run across the room naked, hoping the curtains haven't opened, and switch off your alarm. And the hairdryer is exactly where it should be in the little cupboard, but it's tethered to the wall and there's no mirror there. You had that happen before? Okay, so you take it out and you can't use it here. You have to do this awkward dance and look into the mirror over there. And it's only by living through the experience that you actually start to see what goes wrong. And it's amazing how we don't live through experiences with our customers. We prefer more removed academic things like focus groups. What goes wrong with focus groups? Well, let's say, for example, you sell chewing gum. You bring me into your room and you put 3 different types of chewing gum in front of me and you say, taste them. Now, what's the implied underlying question there? The implied underlying question is, which tastes best? It's the wrong question. Let me tell you why. I'll discover which one tastes best and you'll fill in your little forms and off you'll go. But in reality, I only buy gum based on the shape of the little bottle because it has to go into the cup holder in my car. And that's how I select it. And the focus group hasn't told you that. It's only by living with the people who experience these things that we find out what's awful about us. And that takes a little bit of courage. So, today we are talking about the idea of innovation. And as I said, it's about asking a different question. And the first time the penny dropped for me was when I was very young, and my dad taught me this basic principle. Now, my dad is very much like, have you seen the Spud movies? Yeah? You know the dad in the Spud movies? That's my dad to a T, right down to the red beard and the awkward but completely oblivious social mannerisms. We grew up in a nice neighborhood on the West Rand of Johannesburg, but our family was kind of the odd ones out financially. We were never quite able to keep up with the people living around us. And it's little things that give you away, like when the other kids' parents come and pick them up, they sort of waft onto the pavement in the BMWs and the Mercedes-Benzes. And, Mom would open the car door and expensive air would escape onto the pavement. And then it'd be like, Johnny, close the door, you're letting the poverty in. And you could tell when my dad was coming because you could hear the old Peugeot station wagon 3 or 4 blocks away before you could actually see it. It'd make these sort of banging noises and the brakes would squeak, and the kids called it Puff the Magic Peugeot. And it would inevitably break down right in front of the school every single day. And my dad had no issues with getting out and calling the 3 biggest, coolest kids and saying, hey guys, come help push. So that was kind of the reality I grew up in. And when you're struggling for money, you have to find ways to entertain the family, which is very likely why me and my little sister exist in the first place. But once you've had the kids, you then have to find ways to entertain them. So my dad sort of looked in despair at the quad bikes and Nintendo sets that the other kids were playing with, and he knew we couldn't afford that sort of thing. So he goes walking out into the backyard thinking, how do I entertain the kids? Now that's a very different question to, how do I afford a Nintendo set? Ask a different question, get a different answer. And he notices that there's only really one defining feature outside. In the yard next door, there's a tree that goes up some 50, 60 feet. And at about 30 feet up, which is really, it's about the height of the ceiling, there's a big branch that hangs over into our side of the yard. My dad has this epiphany, and he thinks, rope swing. So he takes a small rock, and he puts it into a cloth sack. Then he ties the sack shut with the end of a rope, and he stands beneath this branch, and he tries to hurl the rock to get it over the branch. Once he regained consciousness, he had actually successfully created what became a legendary rope swing in our neighborhood. When we think of rope swings, most of the time you think of, say, an old peach tree and a length of chain, maybe a bicycle tire, and kids will sort of swing back and forth for about 10 minutes and then forget about the thing, get bored with it. Ours was nothing like that. For starters, you had 30 feet of rope, so that thing covered some distance. And at the end of the rope was a set of handlebars. You'd hold on to them, and then you would run across the length of the yard. Toward the end of the yard, your feet would come out from under you, and you'd hang on tight as you swung over the roof of the house on this side. Then you'd touch down, run across the yard, and swing over the telephone wires on that side. We had surprisingly few fatalities. And most of those were kids nobody missed anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. Fascinating thing is, that swing outperformed the Nintendo sets and the quad bikes. The kids abandoned them at home and came to play on the swing. And all that happened there was my dad asked a different question. Instead of saying, how can we be like everyone else? How can I afford the Nintendo set? He just asked a bigger, broader question. How do I entertain the kids? Ask a different question, you get a different answer. So, quick history lesson. How do human ideas work, and how has innovation unfolded over the course of human history? The very simplified but quite useful model for this one is to think of an inverse pyramid. Basically, it goes like this. First guy has an idea, and that's like the first person putting down their little block. The next few people come along and they look at this block and they go, that's fascinating. We can see a way that 2 blocks could exist on top of that. Then another group comes along and they can see a way that 3 blocks could exist on top of that. Now, this may sound obvious, but it's quite important. The third group could not have put those 3 blocks in the air. Their existence depended on the blocks that came before them. Now, there's a very cool, very sexy term for this one in innovation. It's called an ever-expanding adjacent possible. An ever-expanding adjacent possible. In other words, new things become possible as a result of the things that happened before them. And as the pyramid of human knowledge gets bigger, more and more becomes possible quicker and quicker. So for that reason, we have to be constantly saying, that's awesome, now imagine if. We have to be keeping up with what's going on around us and looking for the next little step along. I'll show you how this one works. Let's pick on the world of, say, the automotive world, cars. You could start right at the dawn of time with the invention of the wheel. But let's go a little further than that, and we go to 1885, where Daimler Chrysler invents the basic car. At that stage, you have a car that has to have human input in order to keep going forward. But then the next little block is added on top of that, and that is cruise control. Now, cruise control makes it possible for a car to keep going without human input. But the car is an unintelligent projectile. It will very happily run itself off a cliff or into a tree. Then we add things like satellite-guided navigation, and suddenly the car is able to know where it is in space. Then Mercedes again adds things like lane keeping assist and the radar that can read where cars are around it, and all of a sudden you have this possibility of a car that can actually go out there and drive itself. And it's amazing how quickly this one is unfolding and how groups all around the world are now testing these difficult word, autonomous, yes, got there eventually. I thought you'd know. No? Okay. Autonomous cars. And it's amazing how far this stuff can go. By way of an example, anyone here drive an Audi? Yeah, a couple of Audi drivers around the room. If you can afford it, you want to hang on for the next Audi A8 limousine, the big one, because this car is going to be able to park itself. Now, you may not think that's incredibly amazing because there are Ford Fiestas that can park themselves. But here's the thing, you've got to be in the Ford Fiesta for it to park itself. Now, you may have gone one step further and you're thinking, like the new E-Class Mercs and so on, you can get out and guide it into a parking spot with its key. No, that's not what I mean either. You're going to go to your meeting, get out of your car, and tell it to go and find parking. Your car is then going to scan the world around it, put on its indicators, put out into traffic, and go and search a 10-kilometer radius for parking. It's then going to find the parking, switch off, go to sleep, and wait for you. You finish your meeting, you walk outside, you press your little button, and somewhere up to 10 kilometers away, your car will wake up and come back and find you. Now, I'm sorry, but how cool is that? Of course, you have to wonder how this will work in South Africa. You have to wonder, what happens with the first cop who pulls this car over for speeding? There's no one in it. I have a mental image that I absolutely love of this beautiful, expensive car right at the front of an intersection waiting for the lights to change as it does. And someone runs up with a gun, points it at the car doesn't care. Lights change, car drives off. That's awesome. Now imagine if. So it opens up adjacent possibles. And of course, that in itself opens up the next thing, which is why just send your car to park? You could send it to do deliveries. You could send it home for your spouse, whatever the case might be. Each new thing opens up something else. It's interesting times for us. So why bother to innovate? What's in it for you? Well, there are a number of reasons it's worth your while. The first one is quite a fascinating one. Over time, excellence becomes invisible. This happens to brands and organizations just as much as it happens to individuals building a career. The longer you do something perfectly, the less people notice. And what tends to happen then is the only way you can get attention back on you, positive attention that grows your brand, your business, your career, is through the loud, messy splash that you can achieve with innovation. It is a solution to the problem of becoming invisible. The next reason it's worth your while is that changes make excellence irrelevant. You may have been the most efficient, most excellent manager of a chain of retail stores, but if they happen to be video rental stores, it doesn't matter how good you were at your job. The world has moved on. Box office, Netflix, things like that have made that model redundant. You were brilliant at it, and the brilliance is irrelevant. So we want to get ahead of that so that you don't become irrelevant. Third reason it's worth your while. Has anyone read Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath? Okay? There's a very interesting study in which they took wars, battles and wars in human history from the last something like 300 years, and they asked a very simple question. Between the smaller side and the bigger side, who wins? Typically, who wins? And bigger and smaller can mean anything. It can mean more ammunition, more arms, bigger armies, whatever the case might be. And the findings were fairly obvious. The bigger army wins something like 78% of the time, except when the smaller army refuses to play by the accepted rules of warfare, at which point their chances of winning against a superior army go up to 65%. And that's a switch from probably will lose to probably will win. And there is a massive opportunity built into that principle if you really think about it. It's saying that the small underdog who refuses to play by the rules of the game can topple the industry giants if they understand how this one works. That's why it's worth our while to think differently. Number 4, even your most ardent supporters don't want another wooden bowl. 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I are sitting watching The Mentalist on TV. It's a Wednesday evening. And the bell rings outside. My wife has a look, and there's this lady who's selling carved bowls, and she's standing at our gate. She has this beautiful smile and a wonderful manner about her, and she says, "Ma'am, I'm down here from Malawi. I'm an entrepreneur. I carved this wooden bowl myself, and I'm selling them door to door. Would you like to buy one?" My wife was taken by it, so she bought one. She put it at the entrance to our home. Now our keys live there, and that's part of our existence. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rings again, and it's the same lady. "Hi, ma'am, would you like to buy another wooden bowl?" She has been back every 2 weeks for the last 3 years trying to sell us another wooden bowl. Now, it doesn't matter how much we like her or respect her or admire her, we don't need another wooden bowl. We've got one. Her solution is innovation, and it goes like this. "Hi, ma'am, I'm an entrepreneur down from Malawi, and I work in the world of woodcraft. This week, I've got wooden bowls. Next week, can I drop by and show you some carved wooden keychains? The week after that, can I drop by and show you this beautiful relief map of Africa? The week after that, I'm going to come by your house, knock on your door, and I'm going to show you this beautiful carved statuette of the president paying back the money." I'd buy one. The solution is innovation. If someone already likes you, but they've got what you have, innovate out and offer more. Number 5, it unlocks hidden budgets. When you're a commodity, they shop for you on price. But when you're something novel, something interesting, something with a fascinating story and a bit of flair, the novelty alone can be enough to unlock hidden budgets and earn you income that they didn't have before. And perhaps the most important reason why it's worth your while is what I call the meteorite strike that no one noticed. A few years ago, I published a book with Penguin called Own Your Industry, How to Position Yourself as an Expert. And they sent me to do a little bit of media work to promote the book. And I found myself sitting outside the studios for Mags on Media. It was a little red couch, and it was one of those sort of squeaky leather ones where you can't move without making a sound. And next to me, there's another guy who's about to be interviewed. And the man who's sort of manning the door, letting us in and out of the studio, indicates to him that he's got 1 minute to go. So I say to him, "What are you here for?" And he says, "I represent a group called Yellowwood Marketing Agency. We've uncovered something that we think is a seismic shift, a meteorite strike in the business landscape in South Africa. We feel that no one's talking about it." And I said, well, I'll bite. You've got my attention. Can you tell me what it is in less than 30 seconds? And he says, yes, I can. He says, our research has uncovered the fact that South Africans no longer care about legacy. They are only responding to one thing, which is, what can you do in my life today? And then he got up and dramatically walked off into the studios. Wise guru departeth. And I thought that really is like a meteorite strike on our landscape, because it means that the companies that are playing on brand and size and legacy are hitting all the wrong notes in the public consciousness. That explains why newcomers like Capitec Bank are doing so well, and why old big legacy brands like our government are not. People are not buying into legacy the way they did before. They're saying, what are you doing for me now? And that's about innovation. That's about answering the question, what's awful about us? And what can you do to guide me through it and to fix it for me? So, if there are so many compelling reasons to innovate, so many reasons it's worth our while, why don't we? There are probably hundreds of reasons why we don't, but I'll run you through a couple of good ones very quickly. The first one is what I call inherited thinking. The thinking that gets handed down from generation to generation tends to become invisible to us. We see the way a thing is done, but we don't ask why. You're looking there at a photo of an Industrial Revolution era factory from the UK. And it looks and acts surprisingly like a modern public school. Let me run you through this one. The employees arrive outside, line up in neat lines, and the foreman blows a whistle. Your kids arrive outside, line up in neat lines, and the teacher rings the bell. In their lines, they go into a small section of the building and sit down in neat rows and begin to produce. Same thing happens with our kids. The foreman stands at the front of the room with his whistle and oversees everything. Teacher stands at the front of the room and oversees everything. They work for a set number of hours until the foreman blows the whistle, teacher rings the bell, and they can go outside and eat a packed lunch. Foreman blows the whistle, teacher rings the bell, they come back inside, sit in their neat rows, and they produce until the end of the day. Foreman blows the whistle, teacher rings the bell, they go home. Come back again, same time tomorrow, do it again. Now we look at that and we say, well, yeah, but that's just the way a school works. No, it isn't. Schools were designed that way to create the right type of employee for an Industrial Revolution era factory. We don't work that way anymore. Now, folks, my point here is not to pick on schools. That's not the point at all. My point is simply, we don't see inherited thinking. We look at a school and we go, but that's just the way it is. No, it was designed for a specific purpose that is now outdated. Inherited thinking, one of the reasons we don't innovate. Another reason we don't is when the rules trump the goals, when the rules are more important than the goals. Has anyone here been to Cairo lately? Yeah. I've been myself, and I've been on one of their little taxi tours around Cairo. And I have a friend who did exactly the same thing, but he had a terrible experience. What happened to him was he was the only guy in this little taxi, and they're whirring around the streets of Cairo. Amazing sights and sounds, and it's all very condensed and close together. They come around one corner, and they go straight over a pedestrian who steps into the road. Da-dunk. Now, the taxi comes to a stop, and there's this moment of silence. And then my friend watches as the taxi driver puts it into reverse and goes back over him. Da-dunk. He goes into first and drives over him a third time. Da-dunk, and off around the corner, and off they go. My friend finds his voice, and he says, what on earth was that all about? And the driver explains. He says, sir, you need to understand, we have a rule here that says, if you hurt someone, you're responsible for them for the rest of their lives. Good rule, right? Socially minded, socially conscious rule. Look at the outcome, okay? Sometimes the rules actually get in the way of the goals. And that's one of the reasons, one of the things that gets in the way of innovation. Number 3, efficiency Nazis and fine-tuning the machine. This is a very human one, and it happens in every organization. Every organization will have 2 different camps of people. And the interesting thing is, both are important, both are necessary. On the one hand, we have the efficiency Nazis. These are the people who like the business model the way it is, and they want to optimize and optimize and optimize. They want to be more and more effective, more efficient, do more with less, just take the thing that is and make it better over time. And we need them, and they're important. On the other side, we have the radical, free-thinking, innovative hippies. And these are the people who come up with the crazy new ideas about how things could be. These two camps are generally at war with each other. In an ideal scenario, here is what we need. We need the efficiency Nazis to optimize, 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 optimize until the dreamers interrupt that with the new thing, and then we dump that and we start again. New idea. Then give it back to the efficiency Nazis and let them optimize, optimize, optimize until we dump that and we do the next big thing. But generally speaking, in reality, what happens is the efficiency Nazis can't let go. They will not have the new thing. Why? Because usually when the new thing comes along, it doesn't look as good or work as well as the old thing. They've optimized the heck out of the old thing. It's working brilliantly. But beware, because the new thing is going to grow up eventually. And unless you're on board with that one, you're going to get run over. This is exactly what happened with Kodak. Kodak invented digital photography, and then they suppressed it because they didn't like it because film was better. It's ridiculous. Then everyone else in the world got better and better and better at digital, and Kodak couldn't catch up because they wouldn't dump the old thing. And that's why we don't have a Kodak anymore. I mean, that killed them stone dead. So that's what we need, and it's a leadership thing. We need our efficiency Nazis to understand that from time to time, they are going to have to give budget to the dreamers and the mavericks who are really just doing things that look like anarchy. And not all of those things are going to give immediate results. But it is important that they have the freedom to try. And once they come up with a new idea, we've got to move on and let go of the old one. What else gets in the way? Here's another uniquely human, hallowing the old way. I read a book on animation a little while ago. It was quite an interesting one, written by the guys at Pixar. And they said one of the strangest dynamics they have to deal with is when young people in their early 20s start studying animation. They have such admiration for the old Disney masters that they want to do things the old way. They actually want to learn how to sit and draw things out by hand the way Walt Disney did. And the 60 and 70-year-old professors teaching them are actually much more progressively minded. And they say, don't be ridiculous. If we'd had computers back then, we would have used them. There's nothing pure about doing it the hard way. And sometimes when you embrace the new way, there is incredible beauty to be found there. And perhaps the last reason why we don't innovate is sometimes we're just too close to what we're doing. We don't have the time. We've got our hands in the machinery of the business, and there's no time to stop and zoom back and think and ask a different question. And folks, that's what this is about. This is a moment to breathe and to say, right, we're here toward the end of the year. We know we need to think about ideas, thinking differently, innovation. Where do we begin? How do we start? What do we do? So the remainder of this presentation is a few of what I think are the best questions you can ask in order to innovate. I have some 45 or 50 of them. I've chosen the top 5 or 6 for you here this morning. How do we innovate? Question number 1. Very simple one. Ask, what are we actually trying to achieve here? What are we actually trying to achieve here? Very simple, and in fact, it's a deceptively simple question. I'll give you an example of that one. I'm going to give you a hypothetical promotion. Congratulations, you are now the president of a nation. But you're the president of a nation that has a problem. It is a drought-stricken, water-stressed, dry climate country. So you're now the head of something like an Egypt or an Israel or a Namibia. And the problem that you face is feeding the most people using the least water. So let me ask you, and this is an actual question, what crop would you grow? Any thoughts? Don't worry about getting the wrong answer. Just shout out anything you might think. What crop would you grow? Dates? Red peppers? Okay? Okay, folks, I've already misled you by asking the wrong question. I asked the question, what crop would you grow? Livestock? You're heading in the right direction. This is going to sound bizarre, but it's true and verifiable. To get the most food with the least water, you should farm fish. Fish. Believe it or not, you use less water to farm fish than to grow any other crop or to farm any other livestock. How weird is that? But you've got to start by asking the right question, which is, how do we get the most food for the least water? If you start by saying, which crop should we grow? You're then going to go in smaller and smaller circles chasing the wrong thing. So you have to start with the right question, which is, what are we actually trying to achieve? And maybe even more importantly, what are our customers actually trying to achieve? As opposed to, how have we always done this in the past? It's like the kind of old joke about the guy running a hardware store, and they specialize in 16-inch drill bits. That's their thing. And he calls his sales team together and he says, guys, what do we sell? And as one, they all say 16-inch drill bits. And he says, no. We sell 16-inch holes in walls. And if you can think of a better, cheaper, faster way to accomplish that, that's innovation. It's not about the drill bit. It's about the hole in the wall. What are we actually trying to achieve here? Question number 2. Which walls must go? This is my little sort of topic of passion at the moment. I love this one. If I had to have stood here 10 years ago and asked you, who is the world's leading innovator? We would probably have heard names like Steve Jobs or one of the sort of guys in the computer world. But today, when I ask that question, we tend to get the name of a South African. Elon Musk. Are you following his unfolding story? It is absolutely incredible to see what this guy is doing. Some publications like Time and Forbes magazine have said the guy is actually changing where our species is going. And that's a phenomenal thing to say about one human being. He is, of course, the head of SpaceX and Tesla. And SpaceX is famous for getting rockets into space, out of Earth's atmosphere, 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper than NASA was able to do so. And that is an incredible feat. And when Elon Musk is asked about how to do this, he gives a very interesting explanation. He says, walk in through the front door of the SpaceX buildings, and guess what you're going to see? You're going to see the back wall of our buildings. Why? Because there are no divisions anywhere. Everyone talks to everyone else. And he says, that makes all the difference. What's going on there is, instead of having one division start a process and then hand it over to the next, he is bringing all the intelligence to bear from one end to the other. And it speeds everything up, and it eliminates cost, and it increases innovation, to the extent that they are able to do things 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper than NASA. And that idea of what's now called 10x thinking has been replicated in all sorts of organizations around the world, and it works. Now, it's not just as simple as saying, all right, let's have open plan. There is quite a lot more to it than that. It's not actually about the open plan per se. It's about bringing all the intelligence, all the stakeholders to bear right the way throughout the process, so that you don't have one group doing something that makes perfect sense to them, but makes no sense to the rest of the organization or the rest of the goal. My next book coming out next year is based around this one. It's called They're Your Rules, Break Them. And the subtitle is 50 Ways to Bust Bureaucracy, Smash Silos, and Create a High-Performance Culture. And it looks at how the Elon Musks of the world do this sort of thing. So the simple way to remember this is, if you keep your toaster makers in the toaster making department, all you're ever going to get is incrementally better toasters. If you keep your rocket makers in the rocket making department, you might get incrementally better rockets. But if you let your toaster makers and your rocket makers meet and mingle, you might get toast-powered rockets, or rocket-powered toasters, or pregnant employees. You never know which way it's going to go. Question number 3. Where has this problem been solved before? I invite you to take a moment of reflection and just ask yourself, what is my number one challenge right now? And folks, this can be in your business, in your industry, or in your own personal life. The problem, the nature of the problem, has been solved somewhere before. and you can hit copy and paste and import that solution into your world. There was a hospital in the US that had an unusually high mortality rate. So they did a study to try and figure out why people were dying in droves at their hospital. And they tracked it down to one problem that they were facing. It was the handover period between the ambulance team and the waiting team at the ER. It would take them 3 to 4 minutes to hand over from one team to the other. They basically discovered while you were in the ambulance, you were fine, you'd live. If you made it into the ER, you'd be fine, you'd live. But in that 3 to 4 minute period, people were dying in droves. So they first did the obvious thing. They went to another hospital and said, how do you do it? And by studying the same dynamic in a similar environment, they got their times down to about 2 minutes. Better, but not great. Then some maverick had this idea, and she said, why don't we go and find out how they do this at a Formula One event? Because if you ever watch that on TV, the car comes in at like 6 gazillion miles an hour, screeches to a halt, and in under 3 seconds, they change all 4 tires, refill the car, give the guy a haircut, feed him a pizza, and off he goes. It is astonishing. And by finding out how they did that, the hospital was able to get its own time down to 7 seconds, and it saved lives. What's your biggest problem? What is the underlying nature of the problem? It's been solved somewhere before. Go hunting for it. So, question number 4. What rules do people want to break? I'll put my hand up first. Has anyone here ever done an illegal U-turn in traffic? Okay, excellent. That did start a Mexican wave around the room. Great. Was it useful at the time? Okay. In South Africa, it is a rule. You may not do a U-turn. There are places on Earth, like California, where you can. They've made provision for it. They know that it's useful and people need to do it. So what happens is the concrete island ends about 10 feet before the line, and there are arrows indicating the fact that you can make a legal U-turn. Now, that's very useful. What they've done there is they've said, what rules do people want to break, and they've enabled it. In South Africa, we say, what rules do people want to break, and we punish them for it. And I wonder if there's anyone who's fairly familiar with Johannesburg. At the top of Sandton, at the top of the hill, there's a McDonald's. And as you come out of that McDonald's, presumably 50% of people will want to go left and 50% will want to go right. You can't go right unless you make an illegal U-turn coming out of the place. And the cops know it. So what do? They sit on that side of the road waiting for you to come out so that they can give you a fine. They know we need to turn out. It is a useful thing to do, but somehow it has become immoral to want to go that way. And that's ridiculous. Now, folks, there are 2 ways that you can use this principle. The first is to ask, among my staff, my employees, what rules are they trying to break? You know, in some cases, they can't have it. They can't break those rules. But in some cases, maybe they're just trying to do things faster. Can that rule be altered, amended in some way so that your operation can speed up? Sometimes they're not just trying to be evil little minions. Sometimes there's a reason for breaking the rule. And number 2 is to say, what rules are our customers trying to break? What short circuits are they trying to take? Or in other words, how many obstacles and barriers have we put in their way because they're trying to get round the hurdles and the obstacles? Can you get them out of the way and simplify things? What rules do people want to break? Question number 5, and we are coming toward the end of our questions. What is our unique signature? I said earlier on that if you have something novel, something with flair and story to it, it can unlock hidden budgets. There was a guy who qualified as an architect in Johannesburg, and he gets his commission to build his first house. But now, because it's his first one, he wants to add some kind of unique signature that makes it special, sets it apart, and makes it his. So he comes up with a simple idea. He builds a little Zen garden on the roof of the house. You can access it from the inside, and the family can go upstairs, stare at the stars, and enjoy their little Zen garden. Family moves in, and they love their house with the garden on their roof, and they tell all their friends, and they show it off to all of their neighbors. Next thing, his phone rings. Are you the guy who builds gardens on roofs? Now, folks, from a business perspective, that is a fascinating question. It's not, are you that legacy brand that's been around the longest? Are you the cheapest? Are you the best? None of that is at play there. Are you that interesting story that I heard about? And he gets his commission to do the second one. He ends up on top in Top Billing magazine and on TV shows and ends up building these Zen garden roofs all over Johannesburg. And now the guy is quite wealthy and prosperous. And he's known, it's his unique signature. He's known as the guy who builds gardens on roofs. He is more prosperous than people who are better than him and more qualified than him and have more infrastructure than him, simply because he told a unique story. He included a unique signature. Now, it's quite difficult to do that in a world that is bogged down by rules and laws and sort of prescriptive norms. So the question then becomes, how can we add a little bit of theater, and how can we actually do something different and get around the laws and the rules? And there are different ways of doing this. In the opening to my book on innovation, rather than talk about like Edison and the light bulb and all the stereotypical stories about innovation, I wanted something uniquely South African. So I heard the story on Talk Radio 702, and a number of people called in and verified that this is apparently true. I've never met the guy myself. Just outside of Soweto, there's a street vendor, and he sells bunny chow. But there are two prices for his bunny chow. Once you get to the front of the line, you can either pay the standard price, get your bunny chow, and leave, or you can pay the extra price for a little bit of theater. And if you do, this is what happens. He fills up your bunny chow with all sorts of things, mutton and curry and eggs, don't ask too many questions, and then he seals it with cellophane. And the cellophane is important because his next step is that he's going to walk out to the N1 highway and throw your bunny chow into traffic. He will then wait for a truck to go over your bunny chow at 100 kilometers an hour. Your bunny chow will go that way briskly. He will then run out into traffic and retrieve your bunny chow. Talk about managing risk at work. And the whole point of this thing is that when you then open it, it's this kaleidoscopic mash of different ingredients that have been run over by a truck. That's the point of the exercise, and people pay more for it because they love a little bit of theater. When we run businesses, we become morbidly hung up on being business people. And we forget that sometimes the story people get to tell about us matters greatly. Sometimes it's the most important thing of all. The story that they get to tell about us, the buzz, the hype that it creates. And I love how these guys have gone about doing this. You caught a Kalula flight recently? In a world of laws and structures and so on, and I mean, these guys must have to adhere to so many rules and guidelines. They've chosen to play with the in-flight announcements. And some of them are so good they have their own websites. You can go and look them up. Some of my all-time favorites, I still sometimes giggle about the lady who said, with a quite perfectly straight face, stands up in front of us and says, "In the event of an emergency, please ensure that you put on your own oxygen mask before you assist your child. If you have more than one child, please pick your favorite now." I was on one the other day where they said, "In the event of a water landing, please will everyone who knows how to swim assemble on the left-hand wing." ... And for everyone else, aish. How can you add theater to the thing that you do? Folks, making the experience of you a little bit special can go a very, very long way. In the simplest terms, think of it this way. If you're a restaurant and you sell flambé, switch the lights off for the 1 second where the flambé is brought into the room so that the whole restaurant turns and looks at it. That's it. Just that bit of theater, that bit of magic, that's something wonderful about you. And the final question I'd like to leave you with, do we invite, encourage, and reward failure? The scene you're looking at there is, of course, from the end of the first Lord of the Rings movie, or perhaps from the beginning of the second one, whichever way you look at it, in which the wizard Gandalf fights with this fiery Balrog, and the two of them go falling and spiraling down to the center of the earth in this bevy of retina-splashing special effects. It's an amazing scene. And I always think to myself, if you're going to fail, that's how you should fail. Try something bold and go down in flames. But of course we worry about that because we have brands and businesses to protect. So the question becomes, how do we allow that necessary bit of failure and still keep our brands safe? There are many ways of doing it. I'll share one good one with you. Okay? What you want to do is measure the excellence of an experiment. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say your young minion comes up to you and they say, I have a brilliant idea that I'd like to try for the business. Rather than shut them down, you say, right, set it up as an experiment and go and try it. Find out what happens. Give them a small budget, give them parameters in which they can fail and make a mess. Now here's the next trick. Almost no business innovation works on the first try. We normally need 2 or 3 pivots where we find out what doesn't work and we try again. So what we're looking for here is not, does the idea pass or fail? We're looking for, with what excellence do they run the experiment? What do they learn as a result of the first inevitable failure? When they then go and try it again, what new feedback do they get? What new information have they received? Let them keep trying, measure the excellence of the experiment. It's not pass or fail. It's how well they go about learning and failing forward. Almost all new business innovation requires 3 pivots, 3 adjustments before it actually pays off. But we have to allow a little bit of failure. Folks, innovation doesn't have to cost a lot of money, and it doesn't require a great deal of infrastructure. The master key is just this. Ask a different question, and you get a different answer. Thanks so much for your time.